Welcome back, fourth graders. I hope you enjoyed a quick little look there at some historical fiction as we were talking about the I Survived book series. And we threw in a little bit of this history along with it. And today, as we look at our genre chart, remember genres are categories, and we focus in on that nonfiction side again, we're going to pick up on some more history, but this time it goes along with our study of the Northeast. If you remember, we were talking about the peopling of this country, the groups that came here, the explorers that sailed across and discovered this quote-unquote new land. And as we looked at those groups of people and those explorers and the settlers, we realized that the area of our country that was settled first was the Northeast. And so we're going to take a look at that section here in social studies. Mr. Van Horn is starting in on that unit as well. And I made a page here in our readers' notebooks titled History of the Northeast. And on this page, History of the Northeast, we're going to keep track of a few things that'll be important for us, especially some kind of tricky vocabulary words. And it'll also help us in our writing, and it'll help us in our social studies and theme work. So if you would, start to make this page, History of the Northeast. On this page, then, in our notebooks, we're going to be keeping track of things that are true, the history, the real things. Remember, history is nonfiction. It means that it's true. Don't get that confused with what we were just studying, which was historical fiction. And remember, with fiction, we add in things that aren't really true, make-believe things. So, for example, in that story that we just were working on, there's a lot of things in there that were not true. The characters and some of the events, some of the words that were said, the actual conversations, things like that were not real. So this is focusing on the history of the Northeast region. And we're going to use an article that actually came out of Scholastic News a while back. It's titled, The Road to Revolution. And right away, I see a big fancy word here, revolution, that's going to be a little tricky for us. So we're going to make sure we understand what that is. All right, you see underneath that main title, The Road to Revolution, we have a subtitle that says 250 years ago, trouble was brewing in Boston. It would forever change our country. Well, Boston is one of our northeastern cities. It's actually in the state of Massachusetts, or what we now know as Massachusetts. Back then, though, we had colonies. They weren't states quite yet. So you have to put yourself back about 250 years ago to this very troubled time in our history. In fact, the music you hear right now is some of the kind of music that you would have heard back then. And you can see some of these pictures of what looks to be soldiers and warring groups of people with some pretty unusual looking rifles and firearms. In fact, you see some of them very well dressed like official soldiers, and some that are more like, well, they called them militia, but groups of citizens that were trying to gain their independence is really what it came down to. So we're going to start to read in this section here about this road to revolution. And you're going to find out that there was a young boy who was very much a part of that history. He was only 11 years old, and they're going to focus on him in this reading. Now that you know a little bit about the Northeast by looking at the map and studying the states and starting to write down the capital cities, you can see on this map here, Boston is in Massachusetts. Remember, back then it still wasn't a state officially. It was a colony. And Boston is where this story takes place. You'll notice there's also two kind of like yellow-looking stars. One is titled Concord and the other is Lexington. I would guess that those are two fairly important cities or villages near Boston that go along with this history of the Northeast. A cold wind whipped through North Boston, Massachusetts. It was February 22nd, 1770. But the bitter chill didn't stop an angry mob from gathering. They yelled and hurled stones at a store that was selling British goods. In the crowd was 11-year-old Christopher Sater. A British official named Ebenezer Richardson lived near that shop, and he tried to stop the protest. But the crowd turned on him, and he ran off into his house. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out, and Richardson had fired his gun into the group. Christopher dropped to the ground. He was wounded. The boy died later that night. Christopher's death would spark, and here's that word again, a revolution. So we see that word revolution, and it's in dark print, so we know it must be important. We can even guess a little bit as to what it might be, because it says here Christopher's death would spark a revolution. A revolution, like it's a thing, like it's a noun. Thankfully, we have down below a words to know box. And sure enough, it says there too that revolution is a noun. It says the usually violent attempt by a group of people to end the rule of one government and start a new one. Usually violent. So not always, but usually violent attempt for one group of people to end the rule of another and to start a new government. So I'm going to put that into my notes because it's a fairly important word, especially with the title of this reading called The Road to Revolution. We need to understand what revolution is. So as you start to put that into your notebooks, I'm going to start to write down my definition as well. So there I finished my note. The word revolution, I put in the definition in my notebook. The usually violent attempt by a group of people to end the rule of one government and start a new one. That word revolution is highlighted. It's a very important word, obviously. The title of the story, this article, The Road to Revolution. So we know it must be important. It's very, very bold there. So I highlighted it here as well. So you're going to copy this into your notebooks. And then you're going to find, if you would, a Post-it note from your supplies. And on this Post-it note, I want you to write down this date. I'll put it up here at the top. February 22nd, 1770. On that Post-it note, we're going to put down the event, the thing that happened, the part of this article that we just talked about. So your assignment is to finish this notebook page, get your definition in there, and then on a Post-it note, just stick it right on that page, put down that date, February 22nd, 1770, and write on here what happened. What was the event? It involves that 11-year-old boy, Christopher Sater. All right, good luck. We will see you again tomorrow.